We're living in deeply fractured times. We've got basically almost all of the public sector out on strike. You know, we're having to check continuously what's going on at the moment. There's probably a strike going on right now. In fact, I know there is one. So we've got the junior doctors who are claiming some of them are paid less than pret-a-manger workers. You know, there's huge public sympathy for them. These are the people that kept our society afoot. They kept everything running when we just came through the crisis of the pandemic. You know, we've got them dealing with we're all dealing with a cost of living crisis. And for people whose wages haven't gone up and kept pace with inflation, it's really, really a grievous sort of state of affairs at the moment. It feels pretty dystopian. And is this what you mean when you say things are going to get even worse? It's going to lead to a complete collapse? Unless we change the values, unless we change how we define money, money should be about meeting people's needs, not just looking after the 1% or the 5%. We're going to continue with the same dystopia. And therefore, people have to recognise you can change the model. Typically, I ran a big business, and businesses are focused on profit for the shareholders, which means they're trying to make people redundant. That means people haven't got jobs. So fundamentally, you're focused on redundancy, which of course people don't want. They want jobs. Then you're focused on mergers and acquisitions, which means you get bigger and bigger organizations, which means, again, people lose decision-making power because they're part of a massive animal and they have no meaningful life because they're part of one cog in the machine. And then we actually work on financialization, which means that since Nixon in 71, the whole world, the UK and America, are focused on financialization. It's all about not creating real goods and services that people need, but actually financial services, which is actually not the real world. It's a kind of parallel universe, and we've stopped producing goods and services that we need, which is absurd. It's absurd. So effectively, because we've allowed capitalism to actually do whatever in the same way as we allowed. We have a super financialized version of capitalism, which we're in thrall to at the moment. Correct. Yeah. We're addicted to it, and it doesn't it only looks after a very small percentage of people, which is a crazy system. We need to go back to industrialization, real production. We need to go back to farming. We need to go back to reconnecting. The farming at the moment is completely process-based and it's automated, and it's about growth, and therefore we're not actually looking after the soil. Because it's so much focused on the shareholder, nothing else matters. The place doesn't matter, the people don't matter, the ecosystem, none of that matters because we're focused. So it's obvious we need to start again where we care about people, place, planet. And it's not rocket science. It's obvious that the system is failing because of the misalignment. So when you start putting it that way, why don't we change it? And we can change it. So to me, when the system collapses, we have to start a conversation, a dialogue with people to actually say, there is an alternative here. Let's start talking about it. Have we also lost a sense of respect for certain professions? I mean, have we also lost, although there's sympathy for the doctors and sympathy for the teachers and sympathy for the ambulance workers, really we've moved to a society that started judging value because of money, how much you're paid. Correct. I mean, to me, doctors and teachers are phenomenal. It's probably the most important of all the functions. And I know they don't get paid enough. They can't put food on the table. And the hedge fund managers and the lawyers and the accountants who are gatekeepers for capitalism are paid ridiculous amounts of money. That's absurd. And therefore, I completely support the doctors. They need to earn a living, and they're sacrificing a huge amount. The system is problematic, and as we all know, the NHS is at breaking point, and they put up with this, and they're not paid enough. So effectively, because we're focused on downsizing, which is making people redundant, financialization, and mergers and acquisitions, and that's the whole model. We don't care about people, and therefore we're not paying people what they need to support their family, to support to live a meaningful life, because the purpose isn't that. The purpose is to make profit for the shareholders. Well, that's crazy because that only looks after the 1%. So we have to align people onto a purpose, which is the 10 purposes that I've described to you, and suddenly everybody's aligned, and we start to get rid of the dystopia that you describe. And at the same time, we're all watching programs on streaming platforms about the 1%, the lives they're leading. We're seeing on social media influencers putting forth, their visions of how good life is, while at the same time, the reality is for the majority of people, 4 out of 10 UK households are now having to choose between either heating their house or putting food on the table these days. So what's going on, what we're holding up as aspirations is not matching the reality of people's lives.
Correct. And we've got to get democracy working because it's not fair. And the people, once they recognise, the point is neither political party at the moment is actually putting forward something which is innovative with the new vision. Whichever party puts this vision forward will win because people democratically want to be cared for. They want to lead a meaningful life, the 10 purposes I describe. And it will win an election. But we've got a completely incestuous relationship between money and capitalism and both political parties, that there's not freedom to actually express these views and to actually put forward something which cares for people and planet and place. So the answer is, I just hope one of the two parties will start to engage in this dialogue and say there is an alternative, because it wins. Because once you start talking to people in the way we are, and so there is another vision, which actually means it's not just financialization, it's not just a few that get cared for, everybody gets cared for. We build loving relationships, loving families, communities, a nation, and then you're all working together to achieve this new vision, which is not complicated. Let me give you an example of one organisation that's actually done this. This is not hypothetical. There's an organisation in Holland called Bertzog, which is a practical illustration of how this works. So this is covered in a book by Joost de Blok called Reinventing Organisations, and it's a practical illustration of how the model works. So what happened in district nursing in 2000 in Holland was initially the district nurses were employed by a small number of large organisations. So initially they were smaller, but then gradually they merge, as happens with M&A, and you get bigger and bigger organisations. And then you start to dehumanize everybody. So what happens is that the workers start to specialize. They start to be treated like a machine. So you have one nurse that takes blood, another nurse that changes bandages, another nurse that bathes the patient. So you start to almost say these people are machines.
And division of labour. Yes, making them more profitable. It's Adam Smith.
It's Adam Smith, and effectively saying that you've got, and what happens is a particular patient has 15 different carers, which is bonkers. So that the workers hate it, and then the scheduling is centralised. So that the workers are told, this is where you have to be. Clock in, clock out. You've got 10 minutes to do this. You've got to go there. And we're not machines. We're human beings. Effectively, what happened was that the nurses hated it. And because they became cogs in a machine, and the patients hated it because they weren't building relationships. They were having to explain.
There was no continuity of care.
Yeah, but 15 times every time a new person comes, and there's not enough time because they were in and out, and then he couldn't. So effectively, you dehumanize the patient, dehumanize the actual worker. So what Joost de Blok worked for one of these organizations, a bit like I worked for Corden. I realized I couldn't do it. But he said he tried to transform it from within. But you can't, unfortunately, because there's so many relationships that are different. You can't actually do it from within. So what he did is he started again in 2006 with a team of 10 nurses, and each nurse dealt with something like 50 patients, but all the needs of the patient was dealt with by one nurse. So it would start with a discussion. We'd sit down with the patient. What are your needs? What? And therefore there was complete responsibility from that one nurse for the whole needs of the patients. And then no centralized planning. So with the way it describes is within you create a self-managing team that all the skills that you need, whether it's any financial skills or marketing skills, are all within the team. So you have no centralized hierarchy telling you what to do. Everybody starts to actually make decisions themselves within the framework. The way Lelou describes the decision-making model, which is very important, is this. At the moment, we make decisions in one of three ways. We either vote on the decision, which doesn't really empower the individual, or we dictate to others what to do, which is dehumanizing them, or we try to achieve consensus, which is impossible. So what they do in these organizations is follow what's called the advice process, which means that within a team, anybody can make a decision. They start to become real people. They can start making decisions, but they have two obligations. They have to check with everybody who's impacted by that decision, and anybody who has advice to offer. What you're saying is we want to empower people to make decisions. So these nurses are actually responsible for the patient's whole care plan. And it's phenomenal that the patients loved it because they build relationships with the carer. And what was even greater, I talked to you about the 10 different purposes. These carers would then start to ask the patient, have you got family, perhaps? Because, of course, it's much more efficient if the family start to get engaged in the care and it's better that family should get involved in caring for the patient. So they think, yes, I've got a child, or why don't you ask them to come in and help you? So this model focused on building family, and it succeeded in building family. Then you go to community. If there was no family, so what about neighbours? You knock on neighbours' doors and neighbours will help. So once your purpose becomes meaningful relationships, you start to create a new model, by the way, which is a lot cheaper. The patients loved it because they actually had people that cared for them, and the actual workers care for it. So hopefully you're understanding the model. This is doable.
So this is a covenantal approach in practice within
and then what
healthcare.
Is, and in 10 years, the whole of district nursing is completely in that model. So all the old organisations stopped, and what was unique about Yoast is because once you're covenantal, you don't compete with others. So once you come up with ideas, you share them with your competitors. Why? Because your purpose is to care for the patient, to enhance their lives. You don't care who does it. So once you move away from this dog-eat-dog model to a model of covenant, you work together and you start to collaborate and to share ideas, which is what should be happening.